session is going to be recorded. So if you don't want to be part of that, then, just keep your camera off and everything will be fine. So I'd like to welcome you to our presentation on lived experience in module co-creation regarding the redesign of the Special Needs and Disabilities module on the Education Studies course here at DMU. So this is a quick overview of what we plan to go through in this presentation. And we're open to any suggestions and questions you may have for us, as well as comments you have on translating these ideas into your own practice, all of which you can upload to the Menti throughout. So the Menti code is just at the top of this slide. If you haven't used it before, just head to menti.com, input the code, and honestly, don't worry if you think of something throughout. The Menti code will be on every slide, and it will stay open throughout the entire presentation, and we'll be answering any questions and thoughts at the end. I'm going to hit the next slide. Yep, okay. So these are the 6 things that we're aiming to go through. So a quick introduction of what the project is, a background and recruitment process, just talking about how it all came about, designing the research that we're undertaking, and having a look at the data that we've gathered so far in the project. Because we're still in the process of collecting and analysing data, there will be more as it goes along in the future. So we're just going to talk about what we have for now, and then we're going to think about the next steps that we are going to take in regard to the project in the future. You going to hit the next slide again? Okay, so the co-production team. So if you wanted to take it first, Rosie.
Yeah, that's fine. So my name is Rosie Smith. I'm a lecturer in education studies, and I'm the module leader for our 3rd year module on special educational needs and disability.
Hi, I'm Emma, and I am a lecturer in education studies at DMU. I've taught before on the special educational needs and disabilities module, and prior to coming to DMU, I was a primary school teacher.
Move on to Liz.
Hi, I'm Melissa. I am a 3rd year speech and language therapy student. I'm on the autistic spectrum. Super excited to be doing this today. Lucy?
Hi, I'm Lucy White. I am a 3rd year education studies student, and I am dyslexic, and I'm also very excited to be doing this research.
So my name is Robin. I'm also on 3rd year education studies. I have a diagnosis myself of ASD, and I'm also dyslexic. And finally we have Luke, who is currently studying criminology, but he unfortunately couldn't make it today. So Rosie, if you'd like to talk a bit about the background and recruitment of the module.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you, Robin. Okay, so this is a project that is currently underway, so it's work in progress at the moment. And basically what we're attempting to do is to redesign a module on special educational needs and disability, starting with the experiences of people who are disabled, neurodivergent, or have special educational needs, along with their families and practitioners. So to give you a bit of background, if you're not in education studies, the degree that we do is not teacher training, it's an academic degree, but most of our students at the end of the course will go on to work in education in one form or another, which of course means working with students with special educational needs and disabilities across a whole range of educational areas. So I'm relatively new in post at DMU. I started about a year ago. And one of the modules that I took on leadership for was this third year module on special educational needs and disability. So we have inclusion modules in previous years, but this is the only one that deals specifically with disability as its major theme. And something that I recognised from having previously taught on an education MA was that a lot of students talked to me about getting through their first degree, getting through their PGCE teacher training, and still not really feeling that they had the skills and understanding to work effectively with students who have special educational needs and disability. And that's something that is concerning. It's also something that is unnecessary, because there's always been this kind of medical model deficit approach, which treats students with special educational needs and disability as though there is some kind of mystery, some kind of problem around them. And a lot of that comes from not engaging with the actual voices of people who themselves are disabled or neurodivergent or have special educational needs. So as I started to think about how I was going to put together the new module, I realised that that needed to be a process, not just where I consulted with those groups, but where I brought people in from the start in terms of thinking about the learning outcomes for the module, the ethos of the module, all of the content, assessment and structure of that module. I've got personal lived experience, so I'm dyspraxic. I've worked in the sector for many years. I have a partner who is autistic, but I only have one perspective. And the idea was to bring in people who could offer a range of perspectives and a range of ways of thinking about disability, about learning and about education. So one of the things that was very important to me when doing that was to recognise the value of the expertise that these different people would bring to the process. I think that sometimes there's a problem when we talk about people's lived experience. We talk about it in terms of kind of them telling a story. And effectively that the only value that those people have to offer is to tell a story which is problematically seen as either inspirational or as tragic. And actually that fails to recognise that people's lived experience doesn't just give them a story, it gives them expertise. So people who have lived their life as disabled people know the structures, the educational strategies that work, the ways to navigate systems, the problems that people come across. They're often part of communities where that experience has been shared. So it was important to say these aren't just people who are telling their story. They're people who have an intellectual and an ethical perspective to bring on the whole module creation process. So in order to make that recognition clear, I felt that it was important that the participants in that module co-creation were paid and were paid at a rate that was commensurate with that of the lecturers who were involved in the project. So in order to do that, I applied for an Advanced HE Good Practice grant, which I was successful in getting, and that meant that we could start to bring on board a steering group of people who would be part of that module co-creation process from the beginning. So the first person that I got involved was Emma Wright, who is another lecturer on the programme. You just met Emma, who'd worked on the module previously. This was important, I felt, to have more than one lecturer perspective. I also had a lot of respect for Emma's experience working in the special educational need disability field and as a practitioner. I was also aware that Emma also is relatively new in post, and it was important to give her an opportunity to begin to kind of develop a research profile, which we'll talk about a bit more as we go through. And we reflected together on the process of putting together the steering group that would guide the process. We decided that that should be made up of us along with students, and that the students recruited should have lived experience either because they themselves are disabled or neurodivergent or because they were family members, experienced practitioners. So we thought quite a lot about how to recruit that group of people, and eventually we requested that we were sent statements with the ways that they fit a particular set of criteria, but that those could be sent in an audio or a video form if that was more inclusive for those students. And then Emma raised a really important point, which is that it shouldn't just be us two selecting the students who were going to be involved in that project. And we felt that because we were coming from this lecturer perspective with preconceptions. So we recruited 2 people to help us select the steering group. That was Dia Rattenpal, who is the Equalities Officer at the Montfort Student Union, and Stephen Fadders from the Spectrum Society. And together they worked with us to go through an incredibly high quality set of applications from which we selected the 4 students who would work with us on putting the module together. So in a minute, I'm going to pass back to them, and most of the rest of the presentation will be those students that we recruited talking about the progress that we have made so far. Before I do that, I just wanted to show you a short video that we made after we shared some of this work before with the perspectives of other staff in the department and other students from other years in education studies who came to share that work with us. So I'm just going to share that now. Do let me know in chat if the sound comes through correctly. Project is to create a module on So the idea behind this project is to create a module on special educational needs and disability for the next generation of educators that genuinely starts from the opinions, the experiences, and the perspectives of people who are disabled and neurodivergent. So what we've used the Advanced HE grant for is to employ a paid group of disabled and neurodivergent students to work with us at every step of the process of researching, designing and developing a new module. We've recently had the chance to share that work with some of the other staff and students within the department.
So I'm part of the expertise research team. Myself, Luke and Rosie are doing that current research. And that basically means that we are choosing expertise and professionals in certain areas and fields of disability to speak to us around what they think the gaps in knowledge are, examples of excellent practice for us, and any resources we can be using to teach the future educators.
You really want students to look at how they can be more inclusive to one another, to work together, to collaborate, to work with the academics, practitioners here, and also to increase access, engagement and participation.
I feel like mainstream teaching, often there's very little focus on special educational needs, teaching of children with SEND, and from what I can remember working in school, something like 3 out of every 30 children in the class, or might be even higher, will have SEND. So every teacher really needs to be prepared to teach children with SEND.
And the fact that you had people on here that were themselves learning, neurodiversity, neurodiverse, the fact that you had students on here doing that course, I think it's wonderful. For one, I mean, it brought me to tears. I was like, okay, now I can see my child fitting in education, which is wonderful. But it's driven by people who have truly felt the impact of the teachers not understanding.
And again, it's very, very, very close to all our hearts. And it is, I was talking to Robin earlier, it is so great to have other neurodiverse people to talk about these things with. I am so nervous doing this. Very, very nervous. What I have found out doing both this and my dissertation is just how little we support people who really do need the support. And I think that researchers, when it's good, it's really, really good, and you're almost lost in reading, which for me with dyslexia, I thought I would never say. Reading takes me a lot more considered effort than most people. And I find that this is helping immensely with my dissertation.
The project is really interesting for our students because they get the opportunity to be actively involved in research. And this is a bigger scale project than a dissertation research, for example, would offer for them. So really what it does is give them first-hand experience at how to devise a research project, how to carry out a research project, how to analyze data, how to ethically deal with that kind of data, especially in a project like this, which is really, really excellent.
But we're extremely keen to have students very much involved with their learning, and I think it's very important that they take ownership of their learning. And having projects like this is really helpful for that. It also helps students to raise their critical consciousness. They start to see their own histories and their own identities reflected in things. So from that point of view, it's very important.
From a personal perspective, with my son, we're very much, the policy that's put in place doesn't necessarily bring about the action that's required. So yes, I think it's a fantastic project to try and just make more people going into education aware of that there is a mismatch between those things, and that they need to be aware of what they're doing, how they're perceiving a child, the behaviour of the child. I don't think there's enough awareness around behaviour of children, because we all have this typical idea of a child. Every child's different.
One of the other key aspects is the fact that having projects like this and co-creation does help to level out that power relationship between lecturers and tutors and students, which again we feel is really important, particularly in a subject such as education. These are key skills that we would like our students to take forward into their professional practice.
Okay, so I'm going to hand back over to the students now to talk a little bit about what we've done since that very first stage of the project.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Rosie. So after joining the project, our next step was to come together and start to design the research, looking at who we wanted to speak to and the best ways to gather the data. So we started looking at the missing voices, so who wasn't included within current guidance. This could include the voices of children, parental opinions, educators themselves, and people who encompass a range of minorities, such as service users with SEND, BAME and SEND, and neurodivergence and SEND. So we really did want to cover as much intersectionality as we could. I'm going to hand over to Liz.
We wanted to talk to experts. I'm from the research team, so we were looking at experts around the people that will engage with people with SEND. So we wanted to highlight gaps in the curriculums and the skills and attitudes of current educators around people with SEND, and then apply these gaps to the new and improved module in order to teach new professionals. We wanted to equip new educators with new attitudes and priorities best suited for improving the lives of people like us throughout their education. So using interviews from multiple professionals, that gives us a very holistic view of SEND and gives us insight into how important change actually is, especially when the themes are so similar between roles that are so different. So these roles included autism experts from autism MAs, SENCOs, speech and language therapists, and we obviously aim to extend this pool of experts to give a more holistic expertise. And we also want to ask about resources and excellent practice, and these are really going to enhance the module to a professional standard in ways that we wouldn't have been able to without this research. Is it Lucy next?
Sorry, yeah, I'm having issues with my internet.
No worries.
So next is sort of how we decided on the research questions. And again, the main aspects we all wanted to come through in this research was lived experience. Most of us feel that lived experience is really vital to research, and particularly research into minority groups. Lived experience should be valued more, in my opinion, and using the voices of not only us as a steering group, but also the voices of our participants who are also neurodiverse. It breaches them into a world of academia that maybe they hadn't been involved in before. So using that as sort of our basis, we really wanted to gather data that again reflected intersectionality as well. And for the questionnaires that are still coming in, like Robin said, this is ongoing research and some is completed, some is not. We really heavily focused on lived experience, not only for students and practitioners, and but also for parents and children. Children who are neurodiverse, it's very difficult to centre research around them, but we think we have come up with a solution in which they can be involved more heavily with this. So I'll pass back to Liz now.
Things that we were asking for the interviews, we were talking about questions around misconceptions, excellent practice, resources and general expertise around what can be improved in education to make it more useful for future educators. So the interviews were really flexible, they were semi-structured, and it allowed a really rich gathering of data from professionals. We aimed to gather originally around the questions we were asking. They were quite structured, but what I found and what most of us have been found when we've been doing the interviews is that professionals are very passionate, and they almost went off script, and they were very eager to offer their anecdotes and things that they just found very, very useful to us. And obviously this has allowed us to build up a really a wide perspective of how we're actually going to move forward to actually be able to design this module and use these experiences and then cross-reference them and actually implement them into what we're going to be doing.
So for the methodology, we used questionnaires because it was the easiest way of accessing data from a large amount of people who we aim to get it from. For example, parents, children and students, etc. We also aim to gather more qualitative information from the questionnaires as well, and we didn't want to just go through the like quantitative, like age, ethnicity, background. So we looked at having the questions of a more open-ended. People can say any opinions that they want, really. So yeah, we also, to do this, we also use focus groups, and we're planning to do focus groups and the interviews, which we already talked about. So the idea of using focus groups was to gain multiple opinions at once and benefit from the group environment with the participants supporting each other's ideas and bouncing opinions off each other. We do aim to keep this online no matter the pandemic, because it is a more accessible format for as many people as we can get. So furthermore, in regard to gathering experience and opinions from specialists, we did decide that conducting interviews would be the best route to take. So, the data so far that we've collected. This is on the next slide, lovely. We identified a few major themes from the interview data. These included misconceptions, accessibility and inclusion, and language and communication. We found that SEND and neurodiverse inclusion issues mainly stem from a lack of awareness and misconceptions about how other people's differences affect their daily life and inclusion within society. Misconceptions have been identified in the data so far to be due to society holding a medicalised approach and mindset towards SEND and neurodiversity, which takes upon a more resource-oriented approach and assuming someone's needs based upon the label rather than looking at them as individuals.
So the next theme we identified was accessibility and inclusion, and this came across over multiple interviews, particularly accessibility in regards to forms of assessment. So mainly looking at how you can promote accessibility through adjusting assessment criteria and different formats and different ways to submit assignments to promote inclusion. For example, allowing students to choose what format they can produce an assignment in. But not only that, but giving students agency over their work and freedom to choose, and having their preferred ways be validated by the university in that way helps immensely with promoting inclusion in all areas of university life, not just can you access a building, but actually being able to express your thoughts and express your academic ability in a way that suits you best. That was a very strong linking theme, and it's very closely tied to inclusion as well. So I'll pass on to Liz now.
So in terms of language and communication, the themes that I've sort of picked out so far looking through that is, it's almost, experts take issue with the way people talk about SEND, and then the way people understand people with SEND. So I'm just going to give a couple of little examples of that. So in regards to language use, when we've cross-referenced the themes from the interviews, and we've highlighted that terminology and syntax, so word order of the terms that we use for people who fall into the SEND group, sometimes aren't up to date. So many have explained that the terms aren't necessarily reflective of the themes that of the actual group itself. So, for example, when I had an interview with a speech and language therapist, she said that the term speech and language communication needs doesn't actually represent the whole scope of difficulties that can actually come under that umbrella. So within that jurisdiction, people aren't always children, and obviously older people who are doing university courses aren't always recognised for their individual sort of needs. They're sort of seen as an umbrella term, and that it could be anything across that spectrum. But we've also seen cases such as autism. It reduces individualisation. Experts have reminded us that umbrella terms aren't indicative of a specific profile of needs. Each person who identifies with the spectrum isn't limited to the nuance of the word autism. So if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. And I think experts are kind of pushing for that to be reflective of how they treat an individual student. So, and the other point I mentioned was the way that people understand the way that people with SEND communicate. So themes across the interview suggests that the way in which SEND groups communicate isn't always in keeping with the standard that's expected from neurotypicals and able people. So experts spoke about how different modes of communication are valid across all mediums, and the standard is not ideal for allowing them to achieve their best medical self. So following on from what Lucy just said, with lecturers allowing people to submit work how they feel is best going to come across, is best going to reflect their potential. In terms of communicating their work, that's not always understood. The standard is very much speech, written, or presentation, language, essay, which obviously doesn't work for everyone. So what I'm seeing is we've got to start and get away from the concrete concepts of communications and which modes are more desirable. They also discuss how in schools emphasis on communication is less targeted as a general skill for children with additional needs in communication, especially in SEND groups. Communications needs to be viewed in the sense that it's a life skill and it will provide foundations for fulfillment in life. It's not exclusively just for education. So just to summarise, what we're seeing so far is that the nuances that occur with the term SEND are not helpful or reliable. We have to teach professionals to see beyond that. Communication about SEND groups need to be perceived with inclusive eyes and open mind. That skills need to recognise communication beyond typical modes of accepted communication, and this is vital to ensuring that everyone's potential is going to be met. I think I'm handing back to Robin now.
Yes, thank you so much. And I'm going to pass straight back on to Rosie, who's going to discuss some of the next steps that we're taking.
Fantastic, Robin. Thanks for that. I'll just pop my camera on. Lovely. So there's still a lot of work to do on the project. We've moved further ahead with talking to these quote unquote expert voices, and we're just getting the data in now from students who are disabled or neurodivergent, parents, teachers and teaching assistants. So we're going through the process of coding those themes, just as we've been doing with the expert interviews, and then using those to build up where we want to concentrate on when we do those small focus groups to work in more detail. The next stage on from that is that we actually have to put the module design together. And that's probably the bit that I'm the most excited about, is making those decisions as a group. And it's a very new thing to experience as a teacher who would normally spend all of your time planning in isolation, to have that opportunity to plan and test out ideas with a group of people whose knowledge and whose experience is really different. We also have a couple of academic responses, hopefully to come out shortly. So we've had a co-authored article accepted for a special issue journal on collaboration in teaching, which will talk through some of the things we've talked through today, the ways that the project was put together and the research that we've done. We've also recently put in a chapter proposal. We're still waiting to hear back from that, and that's for a new book about kind of the ethos in teaching and learning within education studies. And there we really want to assess what's happening with the power relationships in a teacher-student co-production project, and the ways that decision-making happens at that module design phase. So we're thinking about different ways to communicate that, potentially kind of a graphic representation of the decision-making process, and maybe some reflective writing from each of us about our experience across those groups. So that's pretty much where we are at the moment, and I'll just hand back to Robin for any final comments.
Yes, so we wanted to have a quick discussion of our hopes and fears for the project and in the future. So our hopes for the module will be that it retains its inclusivity and accessibility throughout, despite any institutional changes that may adapt this. We wanted to keep the assessment design and stay as inclusive as we can. We also hope that the students who take part in the module are able to take away any insights, skills and knowledge that they can not only use in their future practice as educators, but also in everyday life as well, because it's always important to remember that SEND people exist outside the classroom, outside of education, and in day-to-day life. So I'm going to pass to Lucy if she wants to discuss a little bit about her own hopes and fears.
Yes, so to me, I feel that this research, this co-production, has set an amazing precedent for working with student steering groups, working with student researchers. It's honestly been such an amazing experience. I've loved every minute working with Rosie and Emma and Robin and Melissa. So take notes, essentially. I also hope that through this project, neurodiversity and people with SEND do start becoming more of a mainstream issue. And I hope that DMU will continue to support, not just financially, but ethically, through their ethos, through it, because at the end of the day, it really is just the little things that make such a big difference. But of course, if you are neurotypical, the little things are pretty much non-existent. They're little to us and they're non-existent to neurotypical people. But I really do hope that not just lecturers, but the other higher ups also take note about what we are doing here, because this is really close to my heart. And I really hope that things like this keep occurring. So I'll hand over to Melissa now.
I think my hopes are that I feel like there's a misconception around people like us that we already have all the same opportunities. There is already there is equality, but there isn't equity. I hope that makes sense. In the sense that people tend to think, oh, you already have all of the same advantages as everybody else. You might even have more. They almost don't have like the knowledge of the little issues that happen for us every day. And I'm hoping that this module will really raise those issues in education, especially because once you see those issues, once your eyes are open to small injustices of things that don't happen that should happen, you almost see the world like that. You can't help but notice things that are not right that should be. And you almost move from this stage of equality and wanting everyone to be the same to equity and realising which groups need the most help. So yeah, that's pretty much it from me.
No worries, thank you. So yeah, that's it for our presentation. Thank you for listening.